Hey everyone, Frosty here. I hope y'all are enjoying the most recent patch. In today's video, we're going to discuss and review our thoughts on the 01.000.400 patch, and we will also mention the explanation blog post throughout this review breakdown. I will also associate this patch as the Viper's Commando patch, so as a disclaimer, I did all of my gameplay tests against Terminids. We did our best to mix and match our loadouts to not only see if we can build a new loadout. I'd also like to ask y'all, what are your thoughts on the Viper's Commando patch? And then what are the things that you liked and or disliked about the patch? So with that being said, if you guys like this sort of video, don't forget to like and subscribe as that helps our channel / community grow. Also, we stream on Twitch and do our best to stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. EST. So with that being said, let's dive in today's patch notes. All right, everyone, jumping into patch 01.000.400 review. So the approach that I wanted to take with this video was to really test out everything that I possibly could. And as mentioned in our introduction, I wanted to make sure that I was testing it what I'm more comfortable with, which is Terminids. That's just something that I prefer to gravitate to. So if you're an automaton, there's probably going to be a lot of similarities. But for our automaton divers that are watching this, feel free to add in the things, the pros and cons that you're seeing on y'all's end. It is very insightful, as there probably be some players watching this who play on both. Now, with that being said, we're going to just go ahead and dive right on in. So we're going to go down the list in order here. I'll make sure I put timelines in here for y'all as well, so y'all can kind of skip through. But all right, we're going to start off at the very top here. Freedom's greeting, Helldivers. I'm your host, Release Captain Carlberg, bringing you democracy's latest and greatest from super to superior minds. It is a lot of information, so let's dive in. So we have our overview here. So for this patch, some of the major areas of interest are visible spy lines and attack origins in the Galactic War, stratagems, weapons, planets, and enemy balancing updates, various crash fixes, stability improvements, and other updates, invite-only lobby creations. The rightmost option in the lobby sections currently one localized English, additional language coming in the next patch. I will say that when it comes to how I'm feeling about the patch, I just want to start off briefly stating that I was very satisfied for what we're getting and hopefully see more to come as we read through, because we're going to be jumping right on to the balancing. But again, as a reminder, make sure you guys comment down below what you guys feel about these changes. So starting off, we have balancing. So the goal with stratagem balance changes this patch. With these balance changes, we wanted to buff up some of the weaker stratagems to make them more viable and add more possibility for a variety in the loadouts, which we also changed a few to make them more consistent, but the goal was to keep a similar or higher power level. We're looking into stratagems more to see if there are any other stratagems that might need some buffs or changes to make them more viable. We also want to be better explaining what our goals are with changes, so please see the linked blog post for more information. So we will be pulling from that blog post. I'll also make sure to include it in the description as you guys can see what the reasonings were. So starting off here, we have the AMLS 4X Rocket Sentry. So before we go line for line, I want to say I didn't know that this Rocket Sentry could auto detect the patrols of the Shriekers and just absolutely decimate them. So that might just be something because I just haven't seen people taking it. But if that's new, that is fantastic. This thing was a blast to use. So with saying that, it has a decreased spread. It prioritizes larger targets, increased target distance from 75 to 100 meters. That's awesome. Decreased rockets per salvo from 2 to 1 to get a better ammo economy. Absolutely would agree, because you would blow through these things when using it. Increased explosion radius from 1 meter to 4 meters. And then decrease explosion armor penetration, because the explosion can no longer damage heavy armored enemies. The projectile still has enough armor penetration to damage heavy armored targets though. And then they also increased the projectile damage from 200 to 300. When watching this weapon used against chargers, charger behemoths, and bile titans, it has been an absolute pleasure, in my opinion, from what I saw, seeing the damage and seeing the better economy of ammo conservity. So this was a really good one, a really good update. So we also have the moving down to the MG43 Machine Gun Sentry. They reduced the cooldown from 180 to 120. And this is going to be pulling from the explanation post. So Johan states that the Machine Gun Sentry felt like a worse version of the Gatling Sentry, and they wanted it to have a different place in the toolbox. So they lowered the cooldown to make it more available and more useful when changing positions. So if you want something that can be consistently on an uptime like that, this would be your go-to sentry. Now moving down to the MG43 Machine Gun Sentry, the Gatling Sentry, pretty much all the sentries. They increase the durability from 0% to 80%. So that basically helps the durability of your sentries if they're getting shot at or accidentally, shot by your teammates or hit. They have an 80% durability, which is really nice. So they're not glass cannons essentially. Now, next up is the MG101 emplacement. This is something that I am a big fan of. I used this several times when we went live, and I am very pleased with where the HMG emplacement. I will be definitely prioritizing these in my loadouts. Why? Because with the increased rotation speed, the damage itself is already nice. I believe you get 350 shots per emplacement. The cooldown is not that long for what you're getting, and it just wreaks havoc, especially if you're positional aware of what you're putting down the emplacement for. I have to say, for me, against the Terminids, this thing is phenomenal. I recommend you guys throwing it in your loadout. We will definitely be showcasing some videos with the HMG emplacement. Next up would be the MD6 anti-personnel minefield. So it increases the explosion damage from 250 to 350. I mean, I never really used the minefield until as of now, both the incendiary and the personnel. And it was nice, especially on the defense missions, or, you know, if you're going to be doing like the emergency evacuation where you can consistently throw the minefield down in a choke point, which typically there are some choke points. So it is quite nice to have. Just be mindful whenever you're running through. There might be some stray mines and then you just accidentally kill yourself or your teammate. Same thing goes for the incendiary mines. They have an increased explosion damage from 150 to 210. I do believe that the incendiary mines, they also leave the lingering burn effect, which gets the benefit of the enhanced damage of the enhanced combustion of 25% fire damage. So that's also nice to see the initial explosion damage, plus you're combining it with your damage over time damage. All right, next up is the orbital gatling. So the orbital gatling got increased fire rate by 25%, increased rounds per salvo from 30 to 60, increased armor penetration, can damage heavy armor terminids. It can decrease the cooldown from 80 seconds to 70 seconds. So I will say that with the Gatling barrage, when using it, might be an unpopular opinion, but I was not a fan of it. I'm gonna be honest. I you know, there are times when you throw it on a bug breach and there's chargers and behemoths and biospheres and stuff on the bug breach, and I was pretty disappointed. Of course, I'm sure I'm using it wrong, but I threw this on numerous bug breaches. Is the way I read this orbital stratagem, is to pretty much throw it in an area where there's going to be a bunch of, you know, smaller or chaffed enemies. And I don't know, it just wasn't for me. However, it's nice to see that they did buff it. Now, the reasoning for the buff was the orbital Gatling barrage was not effective at dealing with any specific targets. They wanted it to be better at saturating the target area and also to be able to do damage against heavy armored units. So it is still very likely to outright, is not very likely, excuse me, to outright kill heavily armored targets, but should be able to soften them up. Now, I do agree that it can soften them up, but I felt like I actually healed them more than actually did damage to them. But we'll see as time goes on. I need more time with it to really put down a more concrete feeler for it. But for now, it's good to see they buffed it. It's just not for me. Now, next up is a big one for me, which was the orbital precision strike. So the orbital precision strike got a decreased cooldown from 100 seconds to 90 seconds. It also has a decreased spawn or call-in time from 4 to 2 seconds. Now, you might be wondering, why is this a big one in the patch notes? Well, I'll tell you. This precision strike does a lot of damage. It can absolutely annihilate anything that it directly impacts. Now, instead of using like an orbital rail cannon strike with a 210-second cooldown, you have a 2-second call down, which means you can time very efficiently and accurately of an orbital precision strike and basically kill anything it hits. The other thing is, with it being 90-second cooldown timer, you get a lot more upkeep versus the orbital rail cannon strike. Not only does it have the ability to kill heavier terminids, at the very least, it's going to hurt them a lot, allowing you to maybe get one extra hit off with your expendable or your quasar cannon, or someone else can finish off the kill. I will say, as a caveat warning, that the orbital precisions, or the orbitals in general, I don't know if it's a bug, or I don't know if this was done intentionally, but they are very inaccurate. What do I mean by that? The orbital precision strike, right? You have that red laser beam that's on the ground of where you're anticipating this missile to land. I've seen it land 20 meters away from its actual stratagem throw point where it's supposed to go. Now, I tested this over and over and over again, and I was very disappointed to see that, because that's going to really draw back how much I use it. If that's intentional, I guess it can make sense because of the cooldown reduction and the call-in time. That would be extremely, probably a very S-tier orbital at this point. But if that's not correct, hopefully it's just a bug, and then once it is fixed, I think this is like mandatory in a lot of people's builds. This is a very versatile orbital. But I just wanted to call that out. Let me know what you guys think down below about the orbital precision strike. Again, I've used this so so many times throughout the past few days. Sometimes some missions, they're very accurate. Other times they are very inaccurate. And as just to stay before we move on to the airburst strike, I also tested out in an open field on a map, and it landed a solid 15 meters, 20 meters away from where the actual call in. I even considered where my ship was in the sky. You know, sometimes as you run further into the map, you have to consider where your orbitals are coming from an angle. No, this was, you're in an open field. That should have been an accurate hit, in my opinion. So just keep that in mind. All right, now moving on to the orbital airburst strike. So this one got a decreased cooldown for 120 seconds to 100 seconds. And the reason behind that here that Johan says is the orbital airburst original intent was to block an area for a short duration and kill mostly non-heavy armored enemies in the area. It was underperforming compared to other anti-chaff option and had a very low rate to use. So they made it more attractive by lowering the cooldown, which should make it more competitive in comparison to the Eagle stratagem. Now, I think this is a very good approach. I just think that the cluster bombs, the Eagle airstrike, even the orbital precision strike, and the napalm airstrike still outclass the airburst strike. Most notably because it can do its thing. It can do its things when dealing with the patrol. It can kill the patrols very well. It can kill the bug breaches very well. But when you compare it to things like napalm airstrike, the fact that it has the impact damage, then the lingering effect, it makes it way more effective. I understand that the draw or the kick to the airburst strike is for you to be able to spam it every 100 seconds. I get that in terms of you're able to send it over so many times during a mission. But I find when you're using your stratagems, you kind of want to use it strategically anyway. And if it's strategic and you can spam it down, that's great. But if you're just spamming it down and you can use another option, I kind of find that as, why would I use this? I guess I'd rather just have the lingering effect, but that's just my take on it. Let me guys know what you guys think about the airburst strike, as I'm sure there are some airburst strike fans. But as a reminder, this one just didn't feel so great when dealing with patrols or bug breaches. All right, next up is the Eagle 110 rocket pods. I actually really enjoyed this one. So the changes that they did, they're stating that it may look like a straight up nerf. That is not the intention. So we're also going to read the blog post in just a second. So what they did was they did improved targeting. They increased the projectile armor penetration. So it now does 100% damage to heavily armored enemies instead of 50%. It decreased projectile damage 600 to 250. So that's a nerf to compensate for the improved targeting and the extra damage for the increased armor penetration. And then also decreased the explosion armor penetration. So explosion can no longer damage heavy armored enemies. Now, the reason for that was in their post here, their blog post, was the Eagle rocket pods were very inconsistent in dealing with its main targets, notably the heavy armored enemies. The changes they are making aim to make it to more consistent at dealing with these targets, but it will still not be a surefire way of outright killing them. It should, however, always soften up a target in some way. We are interested in hearing feedback. I will give some feedback, and I will say this will be a part of some of my loadouts and kits. I had a blast using this. This in particular rocket pod made, like, if I was going to use the orbital precision strike or the orbital rail cannon, this is something that I would use to soften up targets like behemoths and chargers and battle titan. This was a very fun hanger item to use, and I would encourage you guys to give this a try. I really enjoyed the rocket pods. I think this was a step in the right direction with this. I would like to see maybe a little bit more damage, maybe the projectile damage up to 300, but that's just really being nitpicky. But they make it really enjoyable when you're engaging onto a target like a Bile Titan. Moving on to the Eagle strafing run. This one and two, this almost is like a must-have in some of my build loadouts. This is just so much fun. And they increase the use from 3 to 4, and they also increase the armor penetration so it can now damage heavily armored enemies. So for anyone who has not used the Eagle strafing run, just think about throwing your stratagem, and anywhere that you're facing in a vertical way, it's going to go down a straight line. And it is so much fun engaging onto a bug breach and also a patrol, or it's also very fun to throw down like a stun grenade and you can hit some of the heavy armored enemies to then soften them up. In the blog post, they say it's supposed to be a tool to effectively deal with small groups of medium armored enemies. To that, we have increased its armor pen to be able to reliably penetrate medium armored targets and soften them up and soften up heavily armored enemies. We expect to have a few tweaks in the future. As with the Eagle rocket pods, we are very interested in your feedback. So some feedback for me. I think this is a fantastic step in the right direction, just like the rocket pods. And I will continue to use the Eagle strafing run. It is a lot of fun and a lot of diversity within a loadout. All right, that takes care of the stratagem section. So now we're going to jump into our, this is still technically a stratagem, but now our support weapon section. So starting off with the GL21 grenade launcher. So they increase the explosion damage by 350 to 400. Now I am very aware that some of you guys within the comment section and in the Helldivers community, of course, course, you guys like the grenade launcher. So I did a little test on this weapon. It was good, even regardless of the update. It's nice to see that they bumped it up by extra 50 damage. So the reason for this is the grenade launcher is intended to be a good weapon at softening up hordes of enemies and provide utility for destroying spawners. While it is still good at destroying spawners, the explosion was a little too weak to reliably damage medium enemies. So this was to buff it to do damage to medium enemies. And that's a great thing. So this is an overall win for the grenade launcher users. For me, still don't see myself really using it, but that's not to say I'm not using it because it's not good. It's just not really my playstyle, but it's good to see if other teammates of mine have this. Great, it's a reliable support weapon. Now, next up is going to be the MG206 heavy machine gun. So it has an increased projectile damage from 100 to 150. So with the increased projectile damage against durable body parts, so that your durable body parts are also known, like I think they also classify this as the squishy bits. So it's not saying that it's going to be easier to kill. It's the part that doesn't have armor on the Terminids. So we got an increase from 23 to 33%. They decreased the fire rate from 450, 750, 900. So those are the options to 450, 600, and 750. I think that's a very good one, mainly for your ammo economy. So that way you're not blowing through it. And when I was using this, I was sticking around the 600 and it was great. They decreased the reload time from 7 to 5.5 seconds. That is a phenomenal thing, and increased the stagger strength, which is also great. Now, thanks to a viewer of ours, he mentioned to me to run this as a primary weapon, as like my main handed weapon for some of y'all who don't like me interchanging words. So I would use the MG206 heavy machine gun as the main weapon in the game. And I had a blast using it. It made this gun feel so good. On top of that, using Fortify or the engineering passive kit. So it reduces the cooldown. You lay down, you crouch, and you just destroy everything. This is a phenomenal weapon right now. And it felt like I was using the HMG in placement, but more mobility, right? I can move around more with it. And it was a lot of fun. And then you also use a supply pack with it, and now you have like infinite ammo. So the HMG failed to deliver on the fantasy of a heavy machine gun when it was released. It had a weak round with low damage and impact. So while the fire rate was up in levels more likely seen on smaller MGs, the HMG's intent is to be a great option at dealing with medium armor enemies and should chew them up easily, similar to the HMG emplacement. So they are lowering the rate of fire further to resemble the fire rate seen in contemporary weapons of similar type, and increasing the damage and staggers so that each hit is significant. This should also make the available ammo last longer. As we were saying, by decreasing the fire rate, right, it's to help with the ammo economy. I highly recommend you guys giving this a try, even if you want to use this as your main weapon throughout this loadout. Be on the lookout for a video about this. I will definitely be making a video about the heavy machine gun as a main weapon, because this thing was a blast to use, guys. All right, now switching off to the MG43 machine gun. The MG43 machine gun decreased reload time from 4 to 3.5, and then they increased the max amount of magazines from 3 to 4. The way that I view this update, before we dive into why they did that change, is to kind of be that middle ground from the stalwart to the heavy machine gun. This is obviously the middle ground. You have a bit more mobility with this. You also get more ammo reserve. It's great to see that they're reducing the reload time. And also, I believe like the recoil on this is a little bit less significant, because the HMG, when crouching, even laying down, you could still find yourself bouncing around. So this kind of is your in between. So going into the blog post here, the intent of the machine gun was that it should be a great crowd clearing weapon with the ability to tackle medium armored enemies. The drawbacks of the machine gun are that you have to sit still while reloading, and this made it hard to compete with the stalwart's mobility. I would 100% agree with that. Therefore, we want to lean into its strengths and reduce its drawbacks slightly to improve the value proposition of the weapon. To that end, we are lowering the reload time and giving it an additional magazine. It is also receiving a buff to damage described below. So the MG43 machine gun, we're just going to skip to that part. The family of the machine gun stratagems that use the 8mm rifle round underperforming slightly, and they have therefore increased the damage slightly. So looking down below here on this blog post, which I will bring up on the screen for you guys, there's a bunch of weapons on here, but skipping down to the MG43 machine gun, they increase the round percentage against, or making it more effective against durable body parts. So again, the non-armored section of the Terminid's body. So it's also good to see a damage buff on it. This is actually one weapon that I sort of tried because I found a global spawn for it, and I used it against a few stalkers that were chasing me down, and we just obliterated them. I'm sure that it was already destroying Terminids or stalkers, but you could definitely feel more of the damage presence, I would imagine. So let me know if you are a machine gun user, you're an avid one, let me know how you guys feel about it. Do you guys notice the difference? All right, now moving down to the machine gun sentry. So excuse me, here's another sentry stratagem. So we're not entirely done just yet with those stratagems. They increase the projectile damage. They increase the projectile damage against durable body parts from 10% to 23%. I believe probably for this one because it was underperforming. And the AR-23 Liberator. So I think this is the one with more medium penetration. I will be honest, like I used to talk very negatively about this weapon, and I used it in a couple of the Helldive missions recently, and it's a great starter weapon, especially whenever you're saving up for like an adjudicator, which we're getting down to in just a second. This is a great starting rifle now, and I'm really gonna take back what I said. I would agree with this weapon. You could even take this to a Helldive mission, to be completely honest with you. I mean, you can take really any weapon to a Helldive mission, but this one wasn't too bad, just an FYI. Now we have the AR-23C Liberator Concussive. At the time, this was by far one of the worst rifles I have ever used. Now I will admittedly say I forgot that this was even in the patch notes, so I failed to try out every single weapon. I imagine obviously with there being an increased projectile damage against durable body parts, you know, we're gonna see some significant difference. You're realistically probably gonna move on from this weapon as you get into higher Helldive missions, because the concussive part, the real biggest reason that you would use this is for the staggering effect of the concussive. It's kind of like the Jar 5 Dominator, where you can stun lock enemies out of animations like calling down bug breaches. It's just nice to see that in the weaker, chewier spots of a Terminid, you get an increase of damage there. All right, moving down to one of my favorite weapons in the game is the BR-14 Adjudicator. Now, if you guys have been following the channel, every time we talk about an adjudicator, I've always said that it needs two things. It needs an increase of damage and it needs 5 more bullets. And we got both. And with that being said, I honestly love where this weapon is at. So it also has a medium penetration attached to this weapon. And I would honestly argue that this now has moved it for me up to an A tier weapon against Terminids and consistency based, because it is able to tear up medium armored enemies. And it is so much fun on full auto. You got 30 rounds, you got 8 extra spare mags, and it just destroys everything. So I'm a big fan of this. I really enjoy this. Now, going on to the blog post here, the Adjudicator with relatively few rounds in each magazine combined with a wild recoil left players no room for error, which didn't feel good for an assault rifle type weapon. So the increased magazine capacity should make the weapon more forgiving of mistakes and encourage a more aggressive playstyle. I will say the reason why I have it as an A tier, I would even argue it could be a high B tier, is because of the recoil. For me, I don't mind it, but in terms of like a holistic point of view, because other weapons have less recoil and do a lot of damage, that's why I'm making that justification. Nonetheless, though, still a phenomenal weapon. We'll be using this, and we will be making a build loadout based off the Adjudicator. All right, moving on to the AR-61 Tenderizer. This was such a controversial weapon when it came out in the Polar Patch Edition. Starting off, I will say, I think it's in a great spot now. Now, I did ask the question on a few content creators and even in the Discord. I will openly admit that with the Adjudicator and the Tenderizer, because the Tenderizer has a low rate of fire, I always thought that maybe the low rate of fire should be the one that did medium pen, and then you just reduce the projectile damage. But regardless, that's just a surface level problem and me being extremely nitpicky. It doesn't really matter. Now, with that being said, the AR-61 Tenderizer has an increased projectile damage from 60 to 95, increased projectile damage against durable body parts from 10 to 17. They decrease the ammo capacity, they decrease the number of magazines you get to 8, and they increase the stagger strength. Now, the reason for this, they did all this, was the Tenderizer was released in a non-representative state as it used the incorrect stats, didn't have its own niche, and felt like a worse Liberator. I would 100% agree. So they're restoring justice and bringing it back to its intended design, which is a very precise assault rifle that rewards high accuracy play by having a heavy hitting round that doesn't penetrate medium armor. So basically my take on it was an absolutely surface level take, because I wanted it to have medium armor penetration, but you know, the more and more you use it, and then also seeing the justification of this, it makes sense. But again, that was just my surface level take, so just bear that in mind. All right, next up is the Plaz 101 Purifier. This was the primary main weapon when we were utilizing the HMG as our main weapon. So the Purifier was kind of acting like the Plasma Punisher, where if you had a blown off bit of a heavier Terminid, you can kill it with the Purifier on its durable part or on its cracked shell. They increased the projectile armor penetration to be the same as the explosion, and then they decreased explosion damage fall off. Now, the justification for all this is the original idea behind the Purifier was to create a Scorcher variant with a charged up mechanic, Unfortunately, since the projectile didn't have enough armor penetration against medium armored enemies, even a direct hit didn't deal enough damage to justify its long charge up time. By increasing the armor pen of the projectile and reducing the damage fall off of the explosion, we hope to make it an exotic option that is viable in capable hands. Clearly, I'm not one of those capable hands. I will not say this weapon sucks because I did not give its respected time. It really just wasn't a play style for me. I did not want to do a wind up weapon and then kind of like a bolt action wind up, and you're not actually shooting you're not cocking it back like a bolt like the Eruptor. I wasn't the biggest fan of Purifier in general, but that does not mean it is bad either. So just bear that in mind. Moving on to the CB9 explosive crossbow. So they increase the explosion armor penetration to be the same as the projectile. They increase the demolition strength so it can destroy bug holes in bot fabricator buildings, and they added the medium penetration tag. So for all you crossbowers, this is a massive W for you guys. Similarly to the Purifier, the crossbow bolts didn't always deal its full damage due to the explosion having lower armor pen than the projectile. Making both the projectile and the explosion penetrate medium armor should make the crossbow more consistent against medium-sized targets and increase its AoE viability. For me, this is not a weapon for me. However, we did use it and we did notice the buffs and it felt a lot better, but certainly is a niche play style. All right, now we're going to move on to by far maybe one of the most controversial weapons this game, one of the most controversial games this weapon has had with the shrapnel removal. So we will definitely make sure we dive into the blog post, but we do see an increased total damage from 420 to 570 damage per shot on the R36 Eruptor. So the blog post states that in one of the previous patches, we removed the shrapnel from the explosion as it made the Eruptor's ability to spike damage too much for a primary weapon and for a support weapon even. Its theoretical max was over 9,000 and introduced some unexpected interactions. We acknowledge that the Eruptor lost a good portion of its capabilities and the additional damage boost didn't make up for the loss of shrapnel. Adding back shrapnel is quite tricky because of the low visibility of shrapnel, which sometimes created situations where you or your fellow Helldivers died with very little feedback of what killed you. So to compensate for that, we're giving the Eruptor 150 more damage per explosion to make it more consistent without introducing new edge cases. The intent is that this change will make the Eruptor viable both against medium armor targets and groups of cannon fodder enemies. This is a great approach. I would honestly at this point use the Eruptor as a support weapon. So bear with me here. So let's say like we take like a stalwart or we take like a machine gun support weapon and like we use that as our main slot weapon, and then we use the R36 kind of as like a niche weapon. That's what I would use it for at this point. It is certainly a viable weapon. It's a very strong weapon and it has medium armor penetration. It does a lot of damage. By all means, this weapon alone can stand on its own as a primary weapon, but the way that I view this weapon now is it'd be good more as like a side weapon of how we introduced the Jar 5 on our previous video. But nonetheless, it can stand alone. This is a great update for it. And bringing us down to reality, like just forget about the whole shrapnel situation. It's good to see that they're still trying to make an attempt to make the Eruptor right. I think this is a great step in the right direction. I think this is a good take for the R36 Eruptor. So good buff on that one. With that being said, we also have the R63 Diligence, which is just increased projectile damage against the durable body parts. That's just the other sniper rifle variant of the counter diligent sniper. And then some enemies have durable body parts that receive only a portion of the base damage from projectiles. Moving on from the support weapons, we are now going to get into the others. So the other slots before we get into the gameplay slot. So an updated recoil stance modifiers, we made changes to the recoil stance modifiers to make them more consistent and also reward being prone more. Almost all of them will improve the recoil and only a 2 have been made worse and only by 10%. So I'll make sure to include that in the blog post for you. And now we're going to be moving down to the gameplay section. So the general part of the gameplay section is they removed operation modifier, the AA minus defense. So that reduces the strategy slots by 1. Thank God. That was really annoying, and I would purposely skip even attempting a planet with it. It's just really annoying. They want to look over the operation modifiers in the future. Right now, there are too few of them, which became repetitive, and the ones we have do not create variety or promote different playstyles. For now, we remove this one because it only encourages players to bring the best stratagems and does not promote variety. 100% agree, because that was really annoying. And also you probably didn't really have many Helldivers wanting to play it besides the more hardcore Helldivers is the word I'm looking for. So for me, I was not one of those. They disabled the retrieve essential personnel defend event mission for the time being. This is to give the mission the proper attention and care that it deserves, as it is now deemed not fun enough or performing as we want it to. So that's good. Super samples, they now spawn on difficulty 6. That's a great thing for Helldivers who want to not play from 7 up. The reason for this change is that we feel that their existence only on difficulty 7 plus forced some players to play the game on a harder difficulty than they wanted to comfortably play on. We do, however, still want a gating of them, but a less punishing one. So that's good. I only play on tier 9, but that's good for players who don't want to play on that and they just want to play of a more casual run. And I know some of you guys are going to say Helldive missions are casual. I would agree with you, but there are some players who do not agree. So that's good that they're focusing on that group as well. So the Siege Artillery stratagem is no longer blocked by the stratagem jammers or ion storms and is available after the mission timer ends and the destroyer leaves close orbit. I would agree. This was really annoying. Primarily this part. I mean, this part makes sense. The stratagem jammers or ion storms. It's this part, which is the and is available after the mission timer ends and the destroyer leaves close orbit. Like, this is on the planet. So this is a good one. This is more of a common sense one. Like, come on. So that's good to see that. Enemies in melee range of the gates in the evacuate high value assets mission will now attack it more consistently, which, I mean, that makes sense. Added the ability to chat from in-game menus. Okay, yeah, I actually ran into this problem before the update and I was like, what's going on? I didn't even notice it because I rarely used in chat, but that's good. That way we can now talk if there's something to say. Updated some first-person crosshairs to improve readability. Great. Social, you now have invite-only lobbies are now supported. You have armor, so there's a new armor passive, Peak Physique, plus 50% melee damage and 30% weapon ergonomics, which I believe is just the Viper Commandos armor that just came out. Planets and hazards. Spike plant. The spike plant that appears on certain planets has been reworked. Great, because I like stepping in every single one of those. Somehow just find myself running through it. It's a complete skill issue. No longer causes bleed or stamina drain if hit by the plant, explosion, or spikes. Now pops 3 times, sending spikes everywhere, dealing increased damage. Oh, great. So instead of bleeding out, I'm just going to take an absolute astronomical amount of damage. Awesome. I can't wait to test that out because I am very clumsy at times. The fire tornadoes. So fire tornadoes have had their behavior change. They should no longer feel like they are actively responding to player movement and should move more randomly. This is also a great thing. However, I did notice that it would follow players. So I would a lot of times train like hunters, like the patrol hunters into these. It is a good thing, but it's also like, that kind of sucks because if you can manipulate it to your advantage, it was quite nice. While a fire tornado storm takes place, enemy vision is reduced, player vision is unaffected. That's a great thing as well. Although realistically, the player visions probably should be affected, but hey, we'll take the win. All right, fire tornadoes being more random should result in more variance in the situation players find themselves in. Tornadoes are significantly less likely to pile up and overlap on extraction points. That one was really annoying, right? Because that's also the downside of it, detecting players and then running towards it. Oh God, that was annoying because then you couldn't extract. You have tremors. The tremors have had their spawning tweaked to be slightly more random. Tremors have had their epicenter size and effect range increase. These changes should result in more situations where enemies away from the players get stunned, as well as reducing how consistently the player has a tremor occur next to them. Next up is our ion storms. So they just added some VFX for ion storms. Next up is visibility. A lot of the planets have had their fog amount tweaked to be less harsh and dense to provide less fatigue from constantly fighting on planets with bad visibility. We still intend there to be foggy planets with worse visibility, but the balance was a bit off. I like that. I tried avoiding a lot of the fog maps that as much as I could because it's extremely frustrating. And I remember specifically playing on this against automatons, and my God, you'd have devastators destroying you from fog of war, and you're just like, I don't even know where I just got hit from. So that's a really good take on this. So they're saying, I guess, maps like desert planets such as Areta Prime, Short Bay, Helmir, and similar. Island planets such as Varelia 5, Matar Bay, Ocean, and similar. And artificial light sources have had their intensities rebalanced and reduced across the board to fix situations with lights completely blinding the player. Yeah, there's sometimes I had to put on my safety glasses because, my God, it was so bright in my room. You know, that was my artificial sun when playing it at night. Oh, the unexploded hell bomb. So the unexploded hell bomb, functioning hell bombs that can be sometimes found on planets, will now explode immediately if hit with stronger explosions or heavy weaponry. They will still have the same delay if hit by small arms or weaker attacks. So be careful with the crossbow and the eruptor and the autocannon. This can be a good strategy though, especially if time is not with you. You can do a very fast explosion versus like a 2 to 3 second countdown timer with smaller calibers. All right, so next up is the vegetation. So vegetation that's large enough to slow players now has an extra function. So when inside the vegetation, Helldivers will be harder to detect, reducing their detection range by enemies. This effect stacks with other detection reducing effects such as nighttime, being crouched or prone, or things such as scout armor passive. This is great because there should have been a benefit. Like this was just super annoying, but this is a great benefit. At least if you're slow, at least you can break aggro, or there wouldn't be aggro on you and you're not punished entirely for running through large vegetation. I obviously understand why your mobility is slowed by running through large vegetation, but it's good to see this part, the reducing their detection range by enemies. So that's nice. Next up is the acid effect from enemies. So the acid effect applied by hunters, bug mines now allows you to sprint while under the effect and slows you by 30% instead of 50%. Thank goodness, because whenever you're hit by these things and then you have like hunters on you and they just absolutely destroy you. Like you might as well just give up and just die whenever you're slowed, especially by the hunters. So this is good. The duration has been increased from 3 to 4 seconds. I mean, that's fine, right? Because you're reducing it by 20%. These changes are intended to make it less punishing for players to be slowed while fighting the Terminid. This allows us to use it in more places without making the experience very punishing. For example, the Bile Spear. Would agree. Armored enemy balance. We have toned down the amount of heavily armed enemies like Bile Titans, Chargers, or higher difficulties, and instead spawn more hordes of small enemies. The difference should be quite noticeable, and the amount should be at least 30% less than before during bug breaches. We have also toned down slightly how many hulks that spawn for the automatons. Our intent is to ease up on the demand of anti-tank weapons, and by having more of the enemies give a better incentive for the group to bring stratagems and weapons that take care of hordes. I'm just going to start off by saying I don't think this happened. I have noticed way more charger behemoths, and I know we're not at the charger behemoths down here, but I'm just going to call out, I've noticed significantly less chargers. I have noticed almost every patrol and every bug breach, there's like 6 to 8 charger behemoths running at me. I guess I wouldn't say this about the Bile Titans, but I am having to bring more anti-tank in to deal with that. Now, I understand that it's just calling out these two enemies on higher difficulties, but you're still needing to bring more anti-tank, at least in the Terminid sections. For our automatons, how is it with the hulks? Have you noticed less hulks? Because I can say on my end, I'm getting Hulk Supreme over here as a Terminid player. Coming up next is our patrols. Patrol spawning is now back to how it worked before patch 1.000.300, with some slight tweaks to that the levels are less empty if you are far away from important locations with enemy presence. So I heard from the solo diving community, this was a happy win for them. So I wouldn't know. I don't really play solo. So let me know down below if that affects y'all in a good way. It sounds like on paper it's great, but let me know if that actually happened. Next up is stunning. Medium and large size enemies now don't get stunned as easily. This will now affect the stratagems that stun. This will not affect the stratagems that stun, and will mostly just affect how easily the pummeler can stun larger enemies. Basically, they just nerfed the pummeler. Not damage wise, but usability wise, the pummeler was pretty solid when dealing with medium and larger size enemies, especially when you're trying to utility wise stun them. So that just effectively nerf the pummeler. So for Terminids, Bile Spears and Nursing Spears will now get slowed if they lose their leg. This is awesome. It's kind of like, I guess, like the Hulks, maybe, I think, where you shoot their legs and they get slower. So that's good. I like this. This gives me another thing to target. Spear Puke now applies the acid effect. Spear Puke can now only damage Helldivers up to 4 times per second, and Helldiver cannot take damage multiple times from the same projectile. Oh yeah, so you're just not one hit out of nowhere, and you're just like really confused of what just happened. So that's good. The Bile Titans. The Bile Titan's head is slightly less durable against weaker anti-tank weapons. It's not a large change and will mostly matter for weapons like the Railgun. Bile Titan's Puke can now only damage the Helldiver 4 times, so like the Bile Spear and Nurse Spear, and the Helldiver cannot take multiple damage, so they're not basically getting one shot. The Puke now also has a bigger spread though, and also is still not recommended running through their puke. The Charger Behemoth. I know we got a little ahead of ourselves in the previous little rant I had about the Charger Behemoths, but the Charger Behemoth is now joining the battle in higher difficulties. It can now also take more damage than before. This enables us fewer chargers but still retain the difficulties. Okay, so you notice this part where it says they reduce the spawn rate of fewer chargers. That's because they added a crap ton more charger behemoths. So you're dealing with one-shottable chargers, and it can build up quite quickly. There's times where you'll have 4 to 5 charger behemoths chasing you, and you're just like, I don't know what to do right now. Now, the precision airstrike, or the orbital precision strike, has been phenomenal when dealing with them if it lands appropriately and accurately. This, I feel like, is a slight bug. I feel like this needs to be toned down a little bit more, just a tiny bit. Now, a little fun fact, don't aim for the crown on the Charger Behemoths. Like, it used to be able to one-shot Charger Behemoths like the Quasar Cannon and the Expendables. Currently, I have learned aim for the leg. Aim for the front leg, bust the plate off, and just kill it that way. You will save a lot more time. At least that's what I've learned. If you're a flamethrower user like myself, the time to kill is still really good with the flamethrower. So stun grenade it or let it charge, and while it's turning around, focus the leg. You'll kill it quite quickly. Moving on to the Chargers, will now only show bleed out effects from the body if the bleed out state has started. It can still show bleed out effects from the mouth without having started the bleed out state. Okay, so here's some things for the automaton. So the Hulk Scorcher, the Hulk's flamethrower now does less damage and cannot damage Helldivers more than 4 times per second. In addition, the Helldiver cannot be damaged multiple times by the same flame projectile, so reducing the chances of being, or instances of being instantly killed, kind of like how the Biosphere acid attack was. The automaton tanks, the tank armor value on the front has been lowered to be the same as the non-vent section on the rear of the tank. The intent was to, initially, it was supposed to be more armored in the front, but the visual language did not show that. The vents on the back turret still has the same armor value, but we'll check for explosion directions correctly now. The damage of exploding automaton jump packs has been decreased by 50%. It will set you on fire, though. It will still set you on fire, though, so be mindful of that. All right, we're moving on to the last bit of the section here. So we have the Galactic War section. So they're introducing the supply lines and origins of attacks. Whenever you look on the mini map or you're in your ship, you'll start seeing all those lines. That's what that is. So the supply lines were previously not shown on the Galactic War map to reduce clutter and improve readability. However, based on the feedback from our community, we made an implementation showing them on the map. This solution tries to maintain the general readability while still exposing the system to other players and on the map, which is really good. I do like seeing that. You will now also be able to see which planet an attack is originating from, potentially allowing for the community to stop the attack at its source. Also really good. Now we're going to move into the fixes. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to read all the fixes. I'm just going to pick and choose the ones that I thought that stood out. As I said, I'm going to have the rest in the description, so that way the video is not like a 30-40 minute long video of me going in between each. So bear in mind, there are going to be some specific things. That way you guys can pick and choose what you guys want to read. So starting out with the FAF 14 spear targeting has been reworked and should now function much better. However, it has lost the ability to target automaton spawners. That is not intended and will be fixed in the future. All right, here is a big notable one, which is going to be the intense heat and extreme environmental modifiers will now affect the Quasar Cannon's reload speed and will show correctly in the HUD. I am notorious for using the expendable anti-tank, all maps. I have now redacted what I'm saying, and I will use the Quasar Cannon in cold planets. The amount of shots you can get off now with this negative 2.5 seconds of the cooldown timer is phenomenal. I mean, it does add up. Really, it does. You're getting way more shots off. And I mean, yes, you can argue. You can absolutely argue with me. Well, you were going to get more shots off anyway. I know, but previous patch, the expendable to me beat the Quasar. Now, Quasar wins on all cold planets, in my opinion. Like, the minute you put it on your back and then you whip it back out for an enemy, it's already ready to shoot. I mean, that's fantastic. The reload speed on hot planets, though, go ahead and bring in expendable. Don't even bother. Like, the plus 2.5 seconds, not for me. Like, just go ahead and bring expendable. So on, like I said, polar maps, Quasar, non-polar maps, no Quasar, expendable. So this was very good for me, selfishly saying. Let me know how you guys feel about that. There was a few others on here that I thought that I saw that was really good. I think this one right here, the weapons of the exosuits are now allowed small adjustments in the angle they fire their projectile versus their muzzle angle. This should make their weapon more accurate. This one too, block players can no longer join the blocker's lobby through recent players. So that's very good, especially if you're having toxic Helldivers trying to, I guess, essentially harass you. I haven't had that problem, but I've definitely heard of that problem from some other people, so that was fixed. Here's some other good ones here. Pelican 1 sometimes leaves immediately after any player gets on board. That's fantastic to not. That's just very frustrating when that happens. I've lost a lot of samples that way. They fixed a bug where Helldivers can get stuck in grenade idle state after throwing a grenade, and relaxed disconnection policy for PC users. There are some crash fixes here and some known issues, but like I said, I'm not going to fully go through it, as that's, some of them might be something you want to hear, some of them not. But I want to just mainly cover the notable things. So that concludes our patch 01.000.400 review. I would rate this patch a solid 8 out of 10. I say that because the bar is low at the moment because of the previous patches we had. I think this is a fantastic step in the right direction. And I think as long as they continue to have this angle or path that they're going, I think they're going to be back close enough, regardless of the whole Sony thing, debacle. I think, you know, we'll be okay as a community. I mean, we already were okay, but it builds trust back into the community. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, I feel good. I feel like the game is a bit more refreshed. Now, with that being said, let me know what you guys think of the overall patch. I did see some negative feedback from the community in terms like now there's more bugs. Aside from all that, I'm just happy to see developers caring about their game. You know, are there a lot of rooms for improvement? There always is. However, again, as I keep repeating myself, so sorry for repeating myself, this was a good patch overall in my opinion, and from my 2 days of playthrough of this. So with that being said, before we go, as a reminder, guys, we do stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on Twitch from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. We do our best. Depends on how work goes. I will notify you in the YouTube community section if there is any changes to the plan. Also, don't forget to check out these 2 amazing videos, and I will see y'all in the next dive, guys. Have a good one.